I found that when I'm driving around town, I'll turn on the radio in the car, and it's Sirius Radio, Sirius FM, and I spend a lot of time listening to Tom Petty radio. And Tom did some incredible music and some incredible shows that they play on that channel. I know, I need to do an episode or a series of episodes on the music of Tom Petty and Mudcrutch and his solo career, and then he was in the Traveling Wilburys. There's a ton of stuff to do there. And I'm running down that dream, but it is going to take a little bit of time. So one of the things that Tom Petty Radio does is it plays a show that Tom did, which is called Buried Treasure. And what happens is Tom digs into his personal vault and pulls out music that has made a difference to him. And that got me thinking about our little channel here, Bernie Drops the Needle. And I guess I can't really call it a little channel anymore, because after 3 years plus, we got over 255 episodes, 1,800 subscribers, and over 200,000 views. As I say, thank you so much for your support. But I decided to open up the vault and go back and look at some of those episodes, particularly some of the early ones. And I noticed that some of these episodes had very few views. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One being that a lot of them are from early on in the birth of the channel, and probably a bunch of you hadn't really found the channel by that point. And because there are 255 episodes, and I get it, you're not going to scroll back through and try to watch every one of the episodes. So I thought what we'd try to do in this episode is take a look in the rearview mirror of Bernie Drops the Needle and give some visibility to some of the artists that are part of that buried treasure. So are you ready? Let's drop the needle. Now, I started this channel in June of 2020. And so one day I was sitting in my little office, and I then noticed all of these albums sitting behind me. And it's like they were just whispering to me, going, tell our story, tell our story. So that's how this channel was born. So let's go back and look at some of these classic episodes that maybe you've never seen. Or if you have, here's a chance to see parts of them again, because I'm going to cut down so that you just see some excerpts. And hopefully that'll intrigue you to go look at the entire episode. The Beatles recorded most of their songs at EMI Studios in London, which, after they released the great Abbey Road album, the studio changed its name to Abbey Road Studios. It's certainly hallowed ground for any Beatles fan, and I got a private tour inside Abbey Road and even got to see the vault where all of the Beatles masters are stored. So let's go back to episode 8, and I called it The Beatles, Abbey Road Studios. It's a working studio, and you can't go in. But I did. This is actually one of my favorite episodes because I get to tell one of my favorite stories. I am, and always have been, a huge Beatle fan. Now, Abbey Road, of course, is the name of one of their most famous albums. It's also the name of the studio in London where they recorded most of their world-changing music. Yes, when you're in London, you can take a Beatle tour, and you can go up and you can see the outside of Abbey Road, but you cannot get through those imposing doors to the inner sanctum. Would you like to know what's inside? Because I've been there. Finally, my host arrived and took me inside the hallowed doors. We walked down a hallway and he pointed out, here's Studio 1. This is Studio 2, where the Beatles did record. This is Studio 3, but all the doors were closed and you couldn't really see anything. But then we went into Studio 2. This is the studio that the Beatles recorded most of their songs in. And the minute I walked into the room, I could remember seeing pictures of them in there. Now, the day I was there, I took some pictures. Here's some of them. The day I was there, It was set up with a bunch of chairs. They were doing some sort of a symphony recording or something. In the next picture, you can see a staircase going up to the control room. This is the room where George Martin would be. The Beatles would be down on the studio floor. The control room looks the same, except all the equipment has changed. Then we walked down some stairs into the basement of Abbey Road Studios and down a long hallway. At the end of the hallway, there were banks of lights shining on what looked like a bank vault door. And there were lots of security cameras around. And my friend said, "Don't touch the door, it's alarmed." This was it. This is the vault of all of the Beatles recordings, master tapes, outtakes, everything that they've done, right on the other side of that door. They didn't open the door for me. Now, the very next day, I did take a Beatles tour. We stopped out in front of the studios, and the guide of the tour says, "I'm sorry, no one is allowed in. It is a working studio. So take your pictures, but we're going to have to leave." And I couldn't resist myself. I said, "That's okay. I was inside yesterday." Here's a link to that episode, so that if you want to watch the entire episode, you can. For our next buried treasure, we're going to go way back in time when I was a disc jockey at a college radio station at UCLA. Let's take a look at episode 13, the Windy City Rock Show. I've told you I was a disc jockey at KPPC in Los Angeles, but prior to that, when I was at school at UCLA, I worked for the radio station there. And I heard that there was going to be a big rock show in Chicago featuring 3 up-and-coming acts, and they just all had new albums out. So I went to the program director and I said, "Hey, why don't you give me a tape recorder, cover a little bit of my time, and I'll go and record the bands and talk to the bands. We'll do interviews for the radio station." So that's what we're going to do in this episode. We're going to look at those 3 bands that played at that show and discuss their albums. The first band and album we're going to look at is Aorta. They were from Chicago, and they were one of the opening acts on the bill. This is a strange album. They're a psychedelic band. It starts with a song called Main Vein that reappears 3 more times in different forms on the record. It's a gatefold album whose inside shows a human heart and all the lyrics. It's definitely a strange album, but check out Heart Attack, Strange, and the very weird Ode to Missy Misselpictics, or something like that. The second act on the bill was a new group called Illinois Speed Press. One of the members was Cal David, who had just left Aorta to form Illinois Speed Press with Paul Cotton, who would later join Poco. The Illinois Speed Press first album came out in 1969. The main feature of this mix of rock and roll, soul, and country was its twin lead guitar sounds. Interestingly, the album was produced by James William Guerciero, who made his name producing the Buckinghams, Chicago, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The third act at the show was a band called The Flock. The Flock was a 7-member band with the typical guitar, bass, and drum lineup, but uniquely fronted by a violin and augmented by 2 tenor saxes and a trumpet. Their debut album had a big push from Columbia and even included liner notes from the blues great John Mayall. He says, "2 months ago I was telling the gentlemen of the British press that The Flock was the best band I'd heard in America. I wish them all the luck they deserve." Their first album was influenced by Miles Davis and was moved further into jazz than either Chicago or Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The album did not sell well, and after a second album, The Flock flew apart. This album is for those who want to hear how the Chicago sound developed. And here's a link to the entire episode if you want to check it out. After I got out of college, I started working in radio in Los Angeles professionally. And as a result of that, I got to go to a number of clubs around Los Angeles, and I heard a number of great acts. So let's take a look at an episode which is called Nights in Los Angeles, where I visit 3 really historic clubs and talk about the artists that I saw there. And most importantly, at the Troubadour, I met James Taylor and Carly Simon having an intimate encounter in the men's room.
We'll start with a small little intimate club in Santa Monica. It's actually a guitar store. It's called McCabe's Guitars, and inside the store there's a small little performance area. Tickets would always sell out very rapidly. I saw two excellent guitarists there, John Fahey and Leo Kottke. In 1969, Leo had recorded an album called 6 and 12 String Guitar for John Fahey's record label, Tacoma Records. Leo went on to record 25 albums and 4 soundtracks, including Days of Heaven. Now, he's a great guitarist, and he doesn't really like to sing. In fact, he said that he thinks his voice sounds like geese farts on a muggy day. Let's go over to the Ash Grove. But we're going to have to do this in our memories, because unfortunately the Ash Grove burned down in 1973, whereas McCabe's and the Troubadour are still standing. The Ash Grove was a funky little club that drew some eclectic acts. I remember seeing Joan Baez, Doc Watson, Pete Seeger, Johnny Cash, John Fahey, Lonnie Mack, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Chris Christopherson, and the Firesign Theater on that tiny little stage. The Ash Grove always has a nice place in my heart. Okay, now let's head over to Santa Monica Boulevard to the Troubadour. The Troubadour was also a small club. In fact, it only seated about 500 people. And then one night, April 6th, 1971, I went to see Cat Stevens. Now, the opening act for Cat Stevens that night was Carly Simon, and James Taylor was in the audience. So Carly got up and did her set. And then there was a break before Cat Stevens. Well, during the break, I decided I had to go to the restroom. Now, remember, the Troubadour is a pretty small place. So I walk into the restroom, and there is James Taylor, and he's got Carly pinned up against the wall. And they're just not paying any attention to me. Now, on January 4th, 1973, in an interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Carly actually validates this story. She talks about the fact that when she first met James Taylor, they were at the Troubadour, and he embraced her, and they went in the bathroom. And then, I'll paraphrase what she said, using terminology from The Good Place. She said, he embraced me, we went in the bathroom, and then we forked.
And here's a link if you want to watch the entire episode. For our last buried treasure, we're going to talk about the hippie trippy gypsy. And this is one of my favorite artists. He's also known as the hurdy-gurdy man. Yep, we're talking about Donovan. Let's take a look at episode 55, the hurdy-gurdy man. Here's an excerpt. Donovan Phillips Leach burst onto the airwaves in 1965 with a bunch of singles, Catch the Wind, Colors, and Universal Soldier.
Now, because he started out as a folk singer, it was pretty inevitable that he would be compared to Bob Dylan. But his style quickly changed.
By 1966, Donovan releases Sunshine Superman, one of the first psychedelic albums. It includes the monster hit Sunshine Superman, and which was his only #1 single.
In the fall of 1966, he releases a single called Mellow Yellow. And the long-standing rumor is that the background vocals are none other than Paul McCartney. And in an interview, Donovan has admitted that the term electrical banana has a sexual reference. The single did really well. It charted at #2. The following year, in 1967, he releases one of rock music's first double box set album.
It's called A Gift from a Flower to a Garden. Interestingly, the two records in the set are vastly different. In the US, Epic releases the double box set, but to cover their bets, they also released each record separately. In early 1968, Donovan joins the Beatles traveling to India to study transcendental meditation with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. It was on this trip that he taught John Lennon a unique finger-picking style that John made good use of on the Beatles' White Album.
The 1980s and 1990s were particularly hard on Donovan's hippie image. He continued to record, but his albums didn't sell.
However, on his 75th birthday, May 10th, 2021, not that long ago, he released a new track, I Am the Shaman, which you can hear and see the music video online. And here's the link in case you're interested in the entire episode. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a little bit of fun going back into the vaults and seeing some of those earlier episodes. And I will continue to make new episodes. So hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. And until the next new episode, keep it rocking. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.